on just at the right moment. This is wonderful. Thank you all for being here on another chilly spring day and to explore a very important topic together. I just wanted to mention the restrooms are back there. Hopefully you're enjoying this lovely new space that we have in our community. And how's the sound? Okay, not too loud, not too... Okay, wonderful, great. My name is Lisa Marie Napoli, and I'm honored to be a moderator for today's panel. When the Granfalloon Festival began last year, one of the goals was to highlight the ways in which art intersects with civic engagement and activism. And I know there's been some of that happening already today, this morning, over at City Hall. And the panel today on writing, incarceration, and social justice is a strong example of this intersection. I'd like to start by introducing our incredible panel to you today before I say more about our time together. So, first here to my left is Frank Browncloud. Frank volunteers with Pages to Prisoners to send free packages of books to people held in prisons in 11 states throughout the country. Each week, he reads and discusses poetry with people in our county jail, and he coaches incarcerated writers through correspondence. He's worked hard to find an audience for people in jail by reading their compositions on radio shows and at arts festivals, collaborating with Monster House Press to publish a nationally distributed broadsheet, and collaborating with the Friends of the Library to display the poetry. So thank you, Frank. And next, Max Smith. Let's get my cord here. Max Smith is a veteran of the U.S. Navy and a commercial carpenter and construction manager. He was raised in Kokomo, Indiana, and lived in San Diego, California through the 1980s. He moved to Bloomington in 1993 and has loved this community for nearly 30 years, as many of us have, for 1 or more years. He has, in the past 5 years, found a new love. Creative writing was brought to him while in the Monroe County Jail. He was a participant in the Inside Out program and also a creative writing group. Since being exposed to the idea of expressing and creating change through words, he has written essays and hundreds of poems, some of which have made it to print. So, to his left, we have Lindsey Badger. She's president and program chair for New Leaf, New Life, a Bloomington organization that centers transformative justice, personal growth, and self-advocacy. As an IU instructor of communication, Lindsey began Inside Out courses, bringing university students into the local jail to organize and write with incarcerated students. Her Inside Out curriculum has grown into 3 think tanks, which I thought was very interesting, 2 in the jail, and the Re-Entry Collective, a group for and with formerly incarcerated community members. She's also a facilitator for Women Writing for Change in the local jail, a member of Midwest Pages to Prisoners, and works at Middleway House as the Violence Prevention Program Coordinator and Educator. And we have such a great panel, there's so much to say. Thanks for listening so attentively. Next down the row, we have Michelle Brekke. Michelle is a single mother of 3 wonderful children, Brooklyn, Brett, and Hunter. She has a grandchild, Baylor Wade. In her full-time job, she enjoys being a painter. She also has 2 part-time jobs she loves, coaching a life skills class for New Leaf, New Life, and being a tech at the Women's Amethyst House. Michelle is determined to continue to be successful on her recovery journey. In doing so, she understands the importance of being able to express her feelings. She was given the opportunity early in her recovery, while incarcerated, to practice expressing herself through writing with programs such as Women Writing for a Change. And at our far end, we have Dave Eggers, who is the author of many books, including The Circle, What is the What, and most recently, The Parade. He is co-founder of 826 Valencia, a nonprofit devoted to supporting under-resourced students through writing and education, and Voice of Witness, a nonprofit that advances human rights through oral history book series that amplifies voices such as those of wrongfully convicted Americans, undocumented immigrants, and people in Burma, Zimbabwe, and Colombia. So, thank you, so grateful for each of you joining us here this morning for our panel together. So, great. Okay, a few more introductory words, and then we'll hear from the people you came to hear from. Kurt Vonnegut was fond of repeating a quote from a fellow Hoosier, Eugene V. Debs, that ties in well with our panel this morning. While there is a lower class, I am in it. While there is a criminal element, I am of it. And while there is a soul in prison, I am not free. We're here today and this weekend together as musicians, academics, thinkers, and generally just good people from all walks of life to contemplate our freedom and our voice, or lack thereof, and to celebrate the art, ideas, and community in which we live, and importantly, to recognize the connections we share with those incarcerated. We have the opportunity today to discuss modes of self-expression and healing through writing and reading programs for incarcerated people. Thank you all for being here, and to listen and to reflect, and to be a part of an exploratory conversation about writing, incarceration, and social justice. I'm happy to offer a starting question for the panel, to each answer as they wish. Perhaps we could go down the row for the first one. We'll dive into the opening question fairly deeply for perhaps the first 20 minutes or so. We'll see how it goes. And after this, I'll continue with a few additional questions. There'll be time toward the end, then I'll announce it for a few brief questions from the audience. Our hour of time, I know and I imagine, will continue to move quickly, and I trust it will open up ideas for important conversations to continue. We hope that today's panel is a real spark for you, for conversations to continue far beyond our time together. All right, so this is our starting place, and with that, I'd like to introduce the first question. So to the panel. Is writing or storytelling as an art form particularly suited to delivering messages about social justice or building a sense of community with incarcerated people? Frank?
Okay. I turned this on. I don't know if it's working. Okay. Wow, it's working. That's great. Yeah, so when we're reading poetry in the jail, a lot of times we get sidetracked and we wind up talking about things like neuroscience instead, which is a lot closer to my own expertise. And it's actually relevant to storytelling, because the way your brain works is that whenever you're about to do something, first your brain will unconsciously send a signal to your muscles, you will start to act, and then those sensations are relayed back from your muscles toward your brain, and it's only then that your conscious mind makes a story that explains why you have done the thing that you are already doing. And I could go on for minutes or hours talking about that and explaining all the details of how this works, and you would get basically nothing out of it. Because our brains have evolved for stories, and that's not a story, so it wouldn't help you at all. And that's why I'm so grateful that so many people have helped, like Richard at Monster House Press, Mary Jean Rigoli at the Friends of the Library, to actually share people's stories in their own words. Mary Jean, she printed up these giant posters of people's poetry that they wrote in the jail, and it was a beautiful display, and I'm really lucky because every week when I go into the jail to read and discuss poetry with people, my spouse takes our kids to the library. So I had spies, and my spouse and the kids, they would always go and look at the display and tell me later how many people they saw reading it and talking about the things that they were learning. And one day, my spouse saw somebody stop in front of James Green's poem, Alive on Letters. And it's a poem that's about just waiting to hear from somebody outside. And it has lines like, each day I read an old letter from you, hoping to ration love left behind. And then later in the poem, the narrator finds himself looking at pictures on other men's walls, in case it's enough to keep me alive. And my spouse saw a woman standing in front of this, reading it, and she said to herself, you know, I'm going to write to him today. And she can't have meant James because thankfully he was already out by then. But this woman was going to write to the person in her own life. And that just means a lot to me that this story that he was sharing could make somebody act so differently and bring so much joy to somebody else who is obviously going through a hard time. So now I want to hear from Max.
Well, I'm a hopeless mystic, so it's hard for me to function in a society with all this information. It's funny you mentioned Eugene Debs. I didn't know he was a Hoosier, number one. But he also said, I'm a citizen of this world. I'm not this, I don't have a country to fight for. And that, for me, is what creative writing has where it's helped me. And as a mystic, I can't help but have an epiphany with, all of these words that I've heard already. Because I never felt a part of my community until I was exposed to the writing programs and being incarcerated, which is ironic that I would find community through being locked up. James Green, another mystic tidbit. James Green's girlfriend texted me yesterday and asked that I would write him because he's one of the situation. So yeah, writing to me has become a part of my life. Before I was incarcerated, I never considered words as anything but a source of information. They were usually more bothersome than even entertaining. And now I'm compelled to write. I went through a class that was brought to the jail from IU called the Inside Out program. It's a communications course where half of the class was students from IU and the other half were incarcerated people. And so I learned in that class that with my words I could promote change. And through that process, I became a part of my community because I took ownership of my place in my community through my mystic, integrated, and screwed up thought. Writing is a part of my life, and will always be, and I'm very grateful to those on either side of me for that.
I appreciate this question because it brings up an alternate bio for me. I am a person who saw my uncle incarcerated and my other uncle work in the prison. I saw my mom and my godmother locked into hospitals, my grandmother locked into a mental facility. I saw my baby brother, who I promised I was going to keep out of the system, locked up too. And through that, my family held silence. I still don't know the story of my own father. No one will tell me. And the shame that families who experience incarceration like that hold is one that creates total silence. And from total silence comes rage and isolation. And as a child, I was angry. And it was a librarian and a poetry teacher who gave me a different toolkit. A toolkit that I still believe really strongly is part of our liberation. I believe really strongly in writing with people who I understand as bound up in the liberation movements I'm still a part of. And I believe really strongly that tools like writing, that co-creating, that sharing our stories come to let us realize we're not alone. Come to let us know that our stories are not as shameful as we have been told they are, and told that we must keep. I didn't really expect to tell this story or get so emotional. But I do want to say that I think that this moment of witness, where I have gotten to sit next to people who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated, who I come to understand as like my family, and then I come to understand as like family, has been a beautiful movement that I think is part of justice work. I think that at the root of all of the things we fight for is a fight to actually get to be community together. Thanks.
First of all, I'd like to thank all you guys for coming out to support us. For myself, as an incarcerated person, I didn't have a lot of support, I didn't think, but to see all you guys here, it shows me that even though I didn't know, there are people out there that do support us on the inside. I learned when I was in prison that whenever you speak, you use, I'm not sure, Frank probably knows, one side of your brain, and whenever you write, you use the opposite side of your brain. So for me, to be able to even write letters that nobody else needs to read, like I wrote a letter to my mom that I never sent her, but to be able to forgive her for some of the things that happened in my life, like I had to do that through writing. And then I threw it away, read it to an individual, threw it away. But I guess I learned that I'm not real good at expressing my feelings through speaking, but I'm pretty good at expressing how I feel through writing. And for so many years, I used drugs as a form of hiding all that stuff. And today, I don't have to do that anymore. I am happy to say that I am a little over 3 years sober. And I'm not saying that it's all because of writing, but it definitely had an impact on the way that I'm able to feel about myself and to be able to get things out. I was able, when I went to Rockville, and they don't have a lot of writing programs or anything like that there, like they did at the Monroe County Jail. But they did have a poetry contest, and I got second place in the poem that I wrote. And as I'm on the outside now, like whenever I give my testimony or my lead at a meeting or when I got baptized, I used that poem. And I did bring it with me today. If there's time at the end, I can share it. But as on the ride over here, I had something totally different to share, but I'm going to say, like, for me as a person, like, if you was to look me up online, my case or whatever, you would see that I'm a drug addict. You would see that I'm an intravenous drug user. You would see that I'm a drug dealer. But today, and even then, that's not who I am. So I'm actually a very kind, loving, caring person that has had a really crappy way of life shown to me. So that's the way of life that I chose to take. I'm an overcomer, and I have been able to overcome that. And I struggle on a daily basis to continue on that road. But I'm not willing to give up, and today, like, I share my experience, strength, and hope with other people so that they can also see a better way of life. Some make it, some don't, but I'm not going to give up, and I'm going to continue on. That's all I got.
Thanks. Can you hear me anyway? I'm so honored to be on this panel. Even what we've already heard, I think, is so incredibly valuable. I'm on the other side. I'm a publisher of voices from our punitive nation. We are the largest incarcerator in the world, as you know, over 2 million prisoners, 2.2 million, I think, at the moment. And our nation has a way of throwing away people. I started years ago, we put out a book called Surviving Justice. This was oral histories from wrongfully convicted and exonerated Americans. And one of the narrators in this book is Beverly Monroe, who did over a decade for a crime that she did not commit. And she said that the first thing that they really deprived her of, because she was a biologist, but also like an appreciator of beauty, and the first thing that they deprived her of, and that hurt more than anything, was the deprivation and denied access to beauty. And but she became a mentor to a lot of the younger prisoners, because she was almost 60 when she went in. But that led to us continuing to dedicate ourselves to publishing the voices of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated men and women. And since then we did a book called Inside This Place, Not Of It, about life in women's prisons in the United States, which, as you might know, we hear less from women in American prisons than men, and the access granted to all agencies to women's prisons is absolutely criminal, how limited our access is. And I had a friend who, right after we published this, got convicted of a drug-related crime, and she had to do time in Connecticut, and that was Piper Kerman, who I went to visit. We were friends since we were in our 20s, and then she went on to write Orange is the New Black. And when she went in, I said, bring a notebook, write everything down. She was going to do it. She didn't need my advice, but she did, and I think that she's led, her voice has led to, I think, a new awareness of the lives, and I think so often the over-sentencing that we do in this country, and to humanize those who are living behind bars. But we most recently published a book called 6 by 10 about solitary confinement in this country, which is absolutely shattering to know what we do. A few weeks ago, I was at book involved at a concentration camp in Germany. The solitary confinement cells in this Nazi concentration camp are identical to the ones that we have here in this country. And anyway, this is all to say that we have to continually open our ears and listen to those behind bars and rehumanize these humans, and resist the temptation that we've all grown up with to throw away those that stray, even for a moment, from commit some minor offense, and we are so ready to be done with them. And so I think writing is that path toward the rehumanization of anyone that has to spend time incarcerated. So I'm very honored to be with all of you.
Thank you all. Thank you. That was a very powerful first round. So appreciative of breaking the silence today. And I like how you said, Michelle, you're an overcomer. I think we're all overcomers. I think we all need to be overcomers when we look at the world around us and we see such difficult circumstances and situations, and the example that you gave and that we know about in the jails and prisons and so many ways. So thank you so much for your stories. I had a friend who once said, my story is your story is our story. And I think that's really powerful here this morning. So thank you all. There's a lot of different directions we could go in. You all had such an important, rich stuff to share. And thank you for being so heartfelt and coming from the trueness of who you are. I wonder, when we think about the writing process, in addition to like the brain and how it works and the cognitive aspects, I'm just wondering how do you see the writing as like an empowering and a liberating tool? I'm hearing that starting to come out in some of your stories, and we could just jump around and sort of popcorn response it from this point. So would you like to start, Frank, or anything?
Sure. Yeah, so I think that one of the huge powers of writing is just the way that we frame stories really changes the way that you interpret them. So one story that I was hoping that Max could tell you, and we were talking about it on the way over. One way to frame this story is that there is a dangerous man who walks into a store with a gun and he robs the place. And so we want to take him away from society to keep everyone safe. The other version of the story is that there is a kid who is growing up poor in the kind of way that kids summer vacation because you're losing the free lunch you get every day at school, so you're going to be hungry. and he goes into a convenience store with a BB gun, and he gets some money from it. And then this story continues. This child has Marfan syndrome, which is a medical condition which is very easy to treat. You give somebody beta blockers, they're really cheap, and they can live a full, productive life. And the jail, because he is a child, is giving him this medication. They are trying him as an adult for his crime, and he's looking at 10 or 20 years. But because he's a child, they're giving him medicine. And then he turns 18 because he has been in jail for over 2 years. And so they stop giving his medicine, and he dies in there. And like, framing a story that way makes me feel sick to be a citizen of this country. Whereas if you frame it the other way, which is how our newspaper described it, and how newspapers all over the country are describing the situations of young men like this, it makes you feel like somebody's doing the right thing. And stories should make you feel sick when there's something revolting going on. So hopefully I described that story okay. Max knows more than I do because he was there and lived through it and was forced to suffer with the others as a consequence of this child dying.
Yeah, Frank likes to hurt the reader when he writes stuff. And told me, like, you know, I put some thought into how I thought I would answer today, and our conversation on the way here killed all of that. So I'm winging it. I'm happy to do that. Boo was my friend, and there's a Drake album. If you're reading this, it's too late, is what it says in the front of it. And Boo liked to listen to that. We were in a special dorm in the jail. It was about the size of a large dog kennel that 12 of us were in. I was in there for 14 months. But we had some luxuries in there. It wasn't exactly jail. We could run around our dog kennel 24 hours a day. And we hated it in there, but loved it at the same time because we were able to interact with people from the outside who came and brought programming into us. But Boo came to that dorm in the jail because he was 17 years old. We had a CD player, and Boo and I listened to that Drake CD a lot. And there's one, and I told you I'm a mystic, so it's really tough to not integrate my experience. First of all, if you're reading this, it's too late, and there's some praying hands on the front. And there's a song in there that says, if I die, I'm a motherfucking legend. Boo and I listen to that a lot.
I think staying in this and with this person who also, I think it's worth acknowledging, was a person of color who our system disproportionately tries to erase and did successfully. After Boo died, I went and spent some time with his mother because we were working on memorializing a person who'd been overwritten locally as a criminal. And I think in that moment, and so many moments of connection that follow crisis, the process of writing together through it, and being willing to remember together when our story is a different one than the one that is put in a paper, mattered and mattered. And I think inside, through the process of the writing circle, we've hit so many moments where we've had the opportunity to write our stories together, to co-write about the same issue and realize we're more connected than we ever realized before. That we've been given the possibility of being recognized and recognizing one another when we otherwise felt alone. I started talking about my experience as a child, and when I was young, like 11 or 12, I read a lot of Stephen King. Because it was the first author I found who wrote so openly and without shame about mass incarceration. I'm sure there were plenty of others, but Stephen King was the one I found. And it was intense to find my first connection and moment of recognition in a person who writes horror, and to recognize myself as part of the horror. And so these moments where we get to do something else, where we get to sit down and write next to a mother who's just lost her child, where we get to sit down in a space of crisis, like in the women's block, and have real conversations about how our spaces are failing us and we have each other, comes to matter. It comes to really matter.
So, thanks, Frank, for allowing us to see, to hurt inside. I told him on the way over here, I'm like, I'm actually bleeding. I think I'm dying. But I didn't know about the feller that they're talking about. I don't know if I was away or what, but the truth is that everybody has a story. And as much as some of us want to believe that there are individuals, families out there that everything is together and right, they're not. Like, something is going on in everybody's life. So I just come to believe that, like, I'm not unique in that, and to be able, you can read about things in the paper, you can read about things on the internet, and luckily I was on the inside when I got arrested, because I'm sure the things that was said on the social media was not, I know that for one, that was not true, but for two, I also know that they couldn't have been anything good, because what people like to grab onto is the negative things. So they don't really want to see the positive things in anything in anybody's life, because it's not, they may want to see it, but they don't want to talk about it because it's not entertaining. So to be able to tell your story or to hear somebody else's story, you get the beginning, the middle, and the now, and maybe sometimes the end, but you get to hear the whole story. So I think that's the right answer. Or what?
Oh, it's okay. Just building off of what Michelle said, I did a creative writing workshop at San Quentin in San Francisco Bay. They have a area for prisoners who have been there since they were juvenile offenders. So under 18, they went in for what are often life sentences for serious crimes. But now these men are in their 40s and 50s, and they've been there since they were 17. I don't know what you guys were doing at 17, if you had your head on totally straight, or if you ever made a mistake, but I certainly did. And we wrote together, and these men, I don't know if I've ever been to a more powerful and more, all of them, they own their narratives, they've written them beautifully, they take accountability, but they also give us the full picture of who they were and what kind of circumstances that they were living in. And every one of them, you could see yourself in that person. My God, what would I have done if I had grown up in this environment, or if I was recruited into a gang and I'm with a few other guys and we, you know, a deal goes down and so a stray bullet hits somebody, and now you're doing 40 years at San Quentin. All of these men, it does not serve us to have these men still in prison 40 years later for a crime committed as a teenager. But these stories, if anybody here, anybody in power were to read them and really listen, I think immediately we would say that it's a crime to keep them behind bars, because only in print, and I think writing gives you that unique opportunity. It's different than an interview, different than any other form, where they can reclaim their narrative and really tell you from beginning to end how they got there, what they've learned from it, how they've changed if they needed to change. But we don't always have the conduits to listen. And meanwhile, even in liberal California, 10 miles from liberal San Francisco, these men have no opportunity or no real hope to get out. Because again, we live in this culture where one strike and you're out sometimes. So we need to continue to have these chances to, or these create more opportunities to listen to the stories from beginning to end, right?
Yeah, so one thing that this reminds me of, a lot of times when people talk about mass incarceration, we talk about how it's so horrible that they're like non-violent offenders or drug dealers or things who are being sent away. And it's also really horrible what we are doing to people who have committed violent crimes, and they are not benefiting from being there either. November 2016 was a bad month for a lot of people for things that happened. For me personally, 3 days before the presidential election, my mother-in-law was murdered. A man on the street punched her in the head at about 3 a.m. and then stomped on her head with boots until her skull crushed and her brain bled out. And later I was looking up stories about this because I'm a writer, and the only national organizations that wrote about this were white supremacist websites. And that was pretty crappy, because the story that wasn't being told was that this is a man who was yanked away from his friends and family and put in prisons for 10 years for really minor things. He was selling a little bit of cocaine, which I know because people who go to prison have zero privacy, and so I could look up all of his court records, which is horrible, but I did. And he was sent there and put in this world, and we made things like that. And then when he came out, he hurt someone. And even now, after he hurt someone, we're not doing anything to make his life better or to help him. We put him back in that same place. And it's horrible that the only stories you could find about this person are stories of him hurting someone and not all the harms that we have laid upon him. So.
I appreciate when Frank tells that story every time I've heard it. Because I think as a person who's experienced residual harm, he's also a person who very quickly moves to saying, okay, but there's harm that's happened to this person first. And we talk a lot about how hurt people, and also about how the criminal justice system recreates, like literally recreates the exact same pain that most people who experience hurt and violence have already experienced and have done to other people. There's a really beautiful organization in New York and Brooklyn called Common Justice. And this crew of folks partners with prosecutors, and if the person who is accused of doing harm and the person who's experienced harm directly both say, we want something other than criminal justice, as it's been run through the criminal justice system, they kick most of the cases, violent cases, to this community organization, Common Justice. And when just in terms of numbers, the number of people who've experienced harm, whose cases might be tried in their names to put people away for a long time for violent crimes, more than 90% of people say we want something else. We want some other accountability. We want something other than criminal justice as it's been run. We want accountability, and we want a process for accountability where harm can be recognized, where impact can be recognized, and where people who experience harm and people who have done harm both can have what they need, have what they really need, so that they can move on being humans together. And I think that as a model and a vision is a creative one, is a really artistic one, and one that I hope we can also keep thinking about as a community.
Max, did you want to add anything?
We're taken from those who care by those who don't. Everyone judged on their scale, weighed in the balance. If there is a fabric to society, this is where it is unraveling. Hate woven into love. Unraveling.
Thank you for your stories, and I appreciate reading stories similar, because this is what we need to hear. It reminds me of voices of justice in the face of injustice, so I greatly appreciate that. You know, in our local community, we do have the Community Justice and Mediation Center, and they've been doing a lot of work in restorative justice, not at the level of this New York program that you were talking about, but it is bubbling up here, and there's movement toward, I think we need to understand what restorative justice is as a community as well. There's been a lot of talk about it lately, so I think that's a good community conversation to continue. So I'm going to ask one last tying in question, and then I'd love to open it up to a few more before we wrap up. I'd like to ask, just in terms of our title, right? Writing, Incarceration, and Social Justice. How is writing, how do you see it as maybe a direct tool, or how does it function for social justice? How does writing function as a tool for social justice? Anybody can answer? Frank's always at the ready.
Yeah, so one problem with putting me with a microphone and saying we're talking about storytelling is I really dislike talking about how something works, and I would rather just show people how it works by doing a thing. So here's another story. So one of the people who Max was living with, his spouse was murdered while he was incarcerated in the Monroe County Jail. And there were 3 people involved, a driver and then two men who had happened to get guns earlier in the day, and things went horribly wrong. When this woman was brought into jail, she was actually put in the cell right next to the man who had just lost his spouse because she had been involved in killing her. And he wound up staying awake all night. I wasn't there, this is just the story that I heard afterwards, shouting through the concrete wall to her, trying to forgive her. And then how this relates to writing is another of the men who was in this cell block at the same time. We were talking a lot about persona poems at the time, writing in someone else's voice, trying to take on the perspective of another gender, another ethnicity. He wrote a poem from the perspective of watching people walk into jail, walk by the doors every time they have an appointment with their attorneys or another court appointment, and seeing them all the time and feeling that sense of loss well up in you every single moment, knowing that you are powerless because you're in this tiny concrete dog kennel. And this man who wrote the poem, Rob, he said that it was the most intensely spiritual event of his life, just sitting and writing in his friend's voice about that loss that his friend just undertook. And he's drawn upon that spiritual experience a lot in his own recovery, which I'm lucky to know, because Bloomington is such a small town that while I was sitting in the YMCA snack room typing, he came to the YMCA, he sat down with me and we talked about it. I got to introduce him to my kids, and he got to tell me about his path to recovery and tell me that he still thinks about writing that poem. So.
Anyone else have anything to add?
I don't know that social justice is a thing that's like a big thing that we have a good definition for yet. I think it has a lot to do with figuring out these moments where there's cement walls between us. And I think it takes first a lot of listening to figure out the real impact in a country that has done harm since it was founded in harm. And I think systemically, we imagine social justice as something that tries to erase or overwrite everything that's happened before. But what we're really doing in terms of social justice, like when I feel like I'm in it, I'm in community. I'm working over and around and through cement walls a lot. And I think that is maybe the stuff of it. I think when we talk about social justice, it would be great if all those reforms that we have lined up every single year go through and somehow people above us actually can see and listen well enough to people who've been harmed to make systemic changes. That seems awesome. But also we're here right now, and I think we need to be here for each other. And I think writing has been a way that we can do that we can hear, that we're given an opportunity to open up, and that we can imagine some better future that we ourselves can be part of creating, rather than waiting on a bigger system.
I don't think you can achieve, even approach social justice in any issue without storytelling. You have to tell the stories of those that have been affected and whose narratives have been stolen and distorted. And I'll tell something inspiring or hopeful. I teach high school students, and you can tell them about mass incarceration in the U.S. You can tell them about how we mistreat undocumented workers or Muslim Americans after 9/11. But and that's one thing, the newspaper or the GPS version of it. But if you give them even a 15-page first-person narrative, they become activists in an hour. I mean, they say, oh my God, and now they can see themselves through that person's eyes. They can see that experience. So we've been teaching oral history for 15 years now. We have all kinds of lesson plans for high schools, in case any of you are teachers. There's nothing better to take what's abstract or distant and make it real and electric and personal. And so these stories, it's the only thing we have. We did a book just recently about Central American unaccompanied migrants who came to this country as teenagers. And Jackie Spear, a representative from California, just read it on the congressional floor last week. And the narrator, whose story she told, was just moved to tears to have her story finally heard, in public like that. But also, Spear did this to sort of tell her colleagues, whoever was listening, these are the people that are affected by these policies of family separation or denial of asylum. And that's the only thing we have, or it's the first thing, has to be storytelling. Otherwise, it's data and statistics, and these are the things that have dehumanized people for centuries, and especially now, in an increasingly data-centric society. We have got to push back with storytelling and humanity. Can we hear your poem, Michelle? Yeah.
Good time for it.
I also wanted to touch on this a minute, and I can only speak for myself, but I know that the justice system, whenever I got sentenced, basically my attorney had given me a plea bargain, which I was going to accept because my co-defendant, I knew he had previous charges, he was out on parole and was not going to plead out to his case anytime soon. So I figured, because I couldn't afford my bond, that was my fastest way to get home. So I did plead out to my case, and I did not get what they had told me that they was going to offer me. And the prosecutors, as she was walking away, said, well, she had a chance to work and didn't. So basically, because I didn't work for the system, they didn't give me the plea bargain that they was going to set, that they said that they would. And I was sentenced to 20 years DOC, or 10 years DOC and 10 years probation. But I fought for myself. while I was there. I was able to get into a program even though they told me that I couldn't for 5 years, basically by writing and by not giving up. And after I completed a program, I told my story in a letter to the judge that also went to attorneys, so he had to read it. And I believe I wouldn't be sitting here today if I hadn't been able to tell my story. So
Okay.
I'm pretty proud of this. Okay. Like a bolt of lightning, you come crashing back into my life, claiming I must keep you, that I was your wife. You would pick me up when I was down. All of my emotions you would quickly drown. The tugging feeling that I felt inside, it was your goal to make it hide. You gave me things and showed me dreams, then ripped them away right from the seams. You gave me fame and brought me money. On rainy days, you'd make them seem sunny. When I pushed you aside, you would come right back, knowing I needed you as long as my life was off track. You drug me down, then drug me deeper, turning me into a midnight creeper. You told me it was okay to hang in the hood. Eventually, everyone that I loved would. You kept me high, staying up all night. As long as I had you, reality was out of sight. You took so many things from me, and all I wanted was you to set me free. First Hunter, then Brooke, then you took Brett, telling me it was okay just to forget. Really, you wanted me to give up on my kids, leading me to believe that that's just the way life is? All you did was make it harder. Well, you see, I'm no longer willing to barter. So I say to you, methamphetamine, get the heck out of me. I do not want you in my life. You're not my husband, and I'm not your wife. I'm done doing work for you. You no longer tell me what to do. When you thought forever, you were wrong. I'm done relating to your crying sad song. I got more better things today. Yes, I'm in prison, but that's okay. Dollars you can't pay me, not even $1 trillion. I'll make an honest living. There's no more drug dealing. When I got arrested, that was it. I did not want to end up in your fiery pit. You see, the tugging feeling that you tried to hide was Jesus inside me, and I'm ready to ride. He never loved me the whole time. He's already forgiven me and left my past behind. Even after all the things that I've done wrong, today, God is with me, and He's made me strong. Strong enough to say goodbye. I don't need you. I'm already high. There are no more broken promises, no more mistaken words. All I need to do is spread the word that He cures. He will never lie to me. He's a real true friend. He knows how to take the corner before I even see the bend. I do not need you anymore. Beat it, bud. There's the door. Goodbye today. Goodbye forever. My life is piecing back together.
Thank you so much. Well, we're nearing the end of our time. We do have one more poem. That you want to do it now? Yes. Sure. We're in poetry mode. So. Beautiful. Thank you, Michelle.
This was a poem I brought today, in case there was a time, that was co-written in the women's block. And so it's from the women's block in the county jail in a college town. A co-written poem by women incarcerated in Monroe County Jail and their local writing partner. This town can suck you in and spit you out, a totally different person. It opens its arms, welcome week, tailgates, $2 Tuesdays, Thursday nights, Vegas bombs, shot skis, O-bombs, dollar wells. And I'm no means saying my behavior was okay, but I'm not saying either that I know to do anything else. With all the things it ruins, it's frightening to admit that the only thing that keeps me sane is my addiction. It's ruined my life, keeping me locked in a hellhole, but if I don't use on the streets, I feel like I'm still in that hellhole. This town can suck you in and spit you out. Housing rates rising, student high-rises, all the services moving farther from the city center and nowhere to work a living wage. The burden of managing addiction in the family, the secrets, the burden of my own addiction, and the gift of that release. Sometimes I wonder why my kids or my parents aren't enough for me to just stop. My mother just died and I wasn't there. I lost so much sitting here: family, respect, dignity. Each time I've been locked up, I've lost a little more. I thought I hit rock bottom, the end, 1,000 times. But there's never an end. I've let my addiction own me, and there's this paralyzing feeling that I can't do freedom without it. It doesn't help me that you assume I'm a bad mother, selfish, that I don't care. The label criminal, the sentence, makes it easy for you to assume you automatically feel negative about a criminal without even knowing my backstory. I know you hate me. I know you're afraid of me. I know. I feel the same. I need to kill myself. Loathing. I need people to understand that my anger has nothing to do with them. I need my children. I need community. This jail just sucks you in. The time behind these walls seems to stop, and there's forever for us to see the world we've made for ourselves, for us to settle into knowing the rules are always a ladder out of reach. I go to court in a week. I hope they let me back home.
Okay, so we have a few moments left as we wrap up, maybe for a question or two. I know there's probably more out there lingering, questions in your minds, but as we said before, this is a starting place and a spark for this conversation to continue. So, any pressing questions in the back?
You talk about community justice and how it exists in our country. What country does it well?
What country does community justice well?
Or treats their criminals in a way that actually rehabilitates them so they can participate in society productively?
So what country does it in a way to rehabilitate society successfully and treats their criminals well? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Portugal decriminalized drug use, and their rates of addiction dropped dramatically.
Curious about how that happened, or were you saying more, Lindsey? Please.
I was going to say Portugal sets a really fantastic model for us for the decriminalization we're all afraid of, because as Max noted, the opposite happened. That they instead put in services that responded to chaotic drug use, instead of, again, trying to conceal or create shame or punishment around things like addiction. And there are a couple other countries and a bunch of documentaries about different countries, mostly in Northern Europe, who've set models for community-based responses, so actually developing additional communities that look like houses with kitchens and spaces where people have the resources to still be treated like a human and grow as human beings. I don't know that there's a country, I would say, that's getting it right, though. I'm not sure this is a problem. I think it's a problem the state's created. And I'm not sure it's a problem that the state will be able to self-regulate or perfectly correct. And I think it's going to take communities, and I know a bunch of them, who are trying really strongly to come up with alternatives. There's a crew of folks in Chicago area who work very closely with folks who are undocumented. And they've had to come up with an alternative way of responding to violence and crime that happens in their community when no one can use the cops. I think the history of violence, specifically gender-based violence, that was only recently, like in the last 20 years, has become a criminal justice issue, and I don't know that anyone within the anti-violence movement feels very strongly that the criminal justice system has it right now. I think it's the opposite. But before that, and in my own life, I remember phone trees of people who, when shit went down, I'm probably not allowed to say that. When stuff went badly at home, I saw a network of people who weren't really totally equipped, but were getting there with visions about what else we could do. And so instead of saying what state has got it right, I want to say what community can. Like flip the question and ask that of us.
And it's nonprofits like the ones that are represented here, that can make the difference when the states and the legal system itself is built to be impossibly punitive. Sometimes communities can come in and work in their local jails and prisons and provide a shred of light. Unfortunately, if you're not near San Francisco, if you're not near a college town, if you happen to be in a prison that's isolated, which is the point, they often try to put these prisons as far away from civilization as possible so that they don't have access to these services, these nonprofits, these people that will come in. So it's a long way to go, but before laws are changed, humans have the opportunity to go in and provide work, if the prisons are open to it. But as tough as San Quentin is, there's about 50 nonprofits working there every week because it's so close to 8 million people that want to provide services. And I'll just echo, Scandinavia is usually the place where advances in new methods and theories of incarceration are tested. Everybody's going to get out of prison eventually. 97% of people that go in are coming out. So they better come out. You can't make it worse, right? You have to provide re-entry services. You have to provide ways that that person that may or may not have made a mistake or caused harm can come back and be immediately integrated and productive, right? And woven back into that fabric. So when we, as Americans, we think people go away and that's it, you know? And well, we're done with them. But everybody comes back, and it serves society to provide hope, training, job training, skills training, everything else, so that those humans can come back in and weave themselves back into society. So I don't know. So glad that there's so many people here today. This is something. As a society, we're sort of thinking about it again, aren't we? Oddly enough, in this administration, and Kim Kardashian, of all people, and some other people that are bringing some attention to the way we go about criminal justice. So, thank you for coming.
Okay. One last question.
Max mentioned that Frank has prescribed hurting the reader, and I'm curious about each of the panelists' perspectives on how writers can hurt readers in an inspiring way. Or in other words, like how writers can motivate readers to feel hurt and also to act.
How can writers hurt readers in a way that is inspiring for people to act? That's the question.
Unfortunately, for many of the people who are incarcerated, just being true to their experience hurts readers. It's a horrible, horrible experience that is hard to imagine if you haven't been exposed to it. I didn't get arrested for 30 years. And so to go into jail in my late 40s was staggering. And the things that I realized were happening in our society. So for me to hurt the reader, for me, it means being honest about things that have happened. I also lost someone that I love to heroin, and she died while I slept. And I woke up to her with her eyes open, looking at me with love, and didn't realize that she was dead. And, touched her face, spoke to her, and realized at that moment, oh my God, that's how you do it.
I feel like the story that Frank told about the individual was a perfect example of hurting the reader. And I also feel like that no addict wakes up at any given point in time thinking that I want to be an addict. I feel like a lot of times there's things that happen within our life, but we feel like there's no other way. But I'm assuming if I was, I'm just going to say it for myself, if I was to want to hurt the reader, I would want the reader to feel my own hurt through the writing, to be able to not feel sorry for me, but to be able to feel the truth and the pain that I once felt.
Frank, did you want to?
Oh, no.
Okay, I saw you reaching.
No. Integrity. And
Yeah.
I'm so glad to know people with a lot of it.
Indeed. Thank you for your truth speaking today to this panel. Thank you for all of your deep listening, deep and important listening that we need right now in our world. And just so grateful for this time together, this sense of place. You know, we have this beautiful new space, and to mark it in this very significant way with this really critical conversation feels like a real honor to be a part of. So, as we said earlier, may it continue, may it be a spark. May we know how to have these difficult conversations and hear each other's stories fully. And just so grateful. So, love to, yes.
I guess I did have one other thing to add. So if we have done a successful job of making you feel like garbage, and you would like to feel a little bit less like garbage, so Midwest Pages to Prisoners sends free packages of books to people in prison, and we have brought the supplies to run a brief volunteer session here today. So if you want to stick around and help, usually when people receive books in prison, they share them with many people. So you could potentially be helping hundreds of people in prison today if you want to stay and write a letter and wrap up a package to send to someone. So,
We also have a table right over here, which has some more ways to plug in. There's information tomorrow, 12:30 to 2:30 every year on Mother's Day. We do a banner drop outside the local jail, facing the windows that women who are incarcerated can see. So if you'd like to join us for that, or if you're just going to be other places today and you want to take some of our leftover like flyers and posters and can help distribute that around town, that would be awesome. Tomorrow afternoon at 3:30 at New Leaf is one of our reentry collective meetings, which partners with folks who are formerly incarcerated to think about the sort of justice work we can do locally. This month we're talking really specifically about building mentorship for the first day of release for folks when they have no one to pick them up at the local jail, and what it would look like to actually build sort of wraparound support for day one as community members. Next month, we're talking about learning how to sort of be social workers together and answer more of the letters that are coming from the jail to make sure people inside have what they need and we can connect locally in that way. And then in July, we're talking about increasing co-living spaces and collectivity with folks who are formerly incarcerated, and also supporting folks through like PTSD and crisis after incarceration, and what it means to be crisis response teams and collective mental health support rather than re-involving cops, which doesn't work well for a lot of folks. And so there's some other information over there too about how to just plug in as volunteers with some of our organizations. So we'd love if you would think about the two events tomorrow and think onward with us.
Okay, and since we're doing some closing thoughts, Max, Michelle, Dave, any last brief comments, announcements?
I would just like to share, I was on the inside in 2016 when they did the Mother's Day event, and my kids did get to come visit me, but a lot of people in there as kids did not. But it was really nice, and the jailers actually allowed us to beat on the windows with our cups the entire time. And it was just really nice to look out and see there was quite a few people there. And Mother's Day, when you're inside, is a trying event, even if you do get to see your kids. So if any of y'all can spread that word out, and just, even if you just come for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or whatever, it does make an impact on the inside.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming too. I'm very encouraged by this. It's hard to be hopeful in a universe that tends to chaos, which it does and will. And so anyone who feels like they want to be involved or get involved in some way, there are a couple of really good opportunities to pension prisoners. And if you don't know about New Leaf, New Life, they've installed me on their board, which is very strange to me. Because I am not board material, as they know now. But I am able to work out my experience. There's a very old writing that says, and they overcame by the word of the testimony and by the blood of the Lamb, and they loved not their lives even unto death. And our experience is important, and that's if you want to use your experience to help people, that I think is the only real purpose in this universe that tends to chaos, because you can't explain any of this shit.
Okay, that's the note we'll end on, I think.